Hello, OIS Podcast audience. My name is Rothman. For those of you who don't know me, I am a clinically practicing ophthalmologist. I'm a glaucoma specialist by training. I am currently engaged in direct care of patients about 50% of my time. The remainder of my time I spend running InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmology-specific venture capital fund. We have a portfolio of 12 assets in ophthalmology, and we are currently navigating the propagation and some exits from those assets, and we are actively working on raising our second fund as we speak. Having said that, it is a privilege to introduce today's guests. They are people that I know very well, whom I've known probably almost as long as my entire journey through venture capital. So it's been kind of a long relationship, and hopefully it will be one that is more formal in the future. But for now, just amazing people that I love talking to. So Daphne Haim-Langford, who is the founder and CEO of Tarsier, and Ashley Kline, who is the Chief Commercial Officer for Tarsier. Welcome to the OIS Podcast.
Thanks, Rob.
It's great to have you guys here. I don't know. I think I probably have had meals with Daphne in like several different continents by now, right? At least 5 different countries. I don't know, a few different countries, many different cities. We've known each other for quite some time. I think the first time I met you was probably in San Francisco. Is that possible?
It was yeah. Maybe, yes.
I think it was in San Francisco, whatever that last one was. But one of the most fascinating stories that I've come across in all of the years that I've been evaluating ophthalmology opportunities has been Daphne's. So I'm going to get into it pretty quickly with you, and then we're going to try and go into a little bit about, how your vision has manifested itself into the real world. But, you made a very interesting transition in your career, right? You were a venture capitalist, member of multiple boards, and you became an entrepreneur, and you decided to develop a drug for uveitis, which is not an entirely uncommon path. We see a lot of people who leave the world of finance and become entrepreneurs, but you have a personal journey with uveitis, and I think it's probably been the driver of the success of this company. So can you tell the audience a little bit about how this all came about, where Tarsier came from, and how you are involved in the way you are involved?
Well, sure. I'm happy to share a little bit more. My background as a venture capitalist, but also a scientist from the Israeli Technion, as in biophysics. I had numerous leadership positions in the Israeli life science industry. And my true passion was for nature on one hand, and transforming science into real patient impact. And I love decision-making, and I love thoughtfulness decisions that are required for any executive. And I love execution. So once I found this super interesting bio-inspired molecule at the Sheba Medical Center, that now the name is Dasdotufide, having a personal connection with uveitis, being diagnosed at the age of 8, I realized that, it's probably written in my stars, and I needed to go and do something about that, because up until then, I was just getting steroids, immunosuppressants, and nothing is really, I didn't feel like the drugs and the treatments are good. I didn't like them. And I think that my experience allowed me to recognize the gap, the potential business, but also scientific gap. And I had a great couple of meetings with my dear friend, 30 years, my personal 30 years ophthalmologist, Dr. Ron Neumann, and today is the company's CMO, over a carrot juice, because it's ophthalmology. And this is what my grandma told me that I need to drink.
Eat lots of carrots.
And
good.
And I asked him why it's only steroids, since I'm a very young kid. And we realized that there is a critical hidden, if I may, unmet medical need in uveitis. It's the patients that already progressed to uveitic glaucoma. And when glaucoma sets in, it's a different story, but no one is talking about that. And the current standard of care, steroids are bad for glaucoma. They are putting the patients in extra risk. So, I saw the opportunity. I fell in love in the molecule because it's inspired by nature. And among other things, I was the chairperson of the Israeli Biomimicry Organization, not for profit, promoting technology innovation inspired by nature. And I founded Tarsier. It was just written in the stars. And today I think that we are in a final stage of clinical development, and it was an incredible journey with amazing people that I met along the way and joined me. And
it's not a dissimilar story than my own, right? So Ron Weiss, my partner, and I have a similar displeasure with standard of care, and was one of the reasons why we felt as though we should pursue launching a venture fund, was to try and figure out how we can identify those opportunities that would do things better. And we hope to continue to be able to support companies like yours with our second fund, but ultimately that's not an uncommon philosophy that maybe there's something that we could do better, and a lot of times all it takes is somebody kind of leading the charge. So you're definitely leading the charge in that way. As a glaucoma specialist, I'm used to dealing with this, right? Because everybody comes in with steroid-induced glaucoma, which is one of the biggest problems. And sometimes you feel like a hero, like, oh, just stop the steroids and everything gets better. It doesn't really work well for patients with uveitis, but yeah, it would make my job a little bit easier too if we could make you successful. Just so you know.
I know that many glaucoma specialists preferred not to see the uveitis patient.
Yeah, we do not like you. We love you, but we don't like you as a patient.
Exactly. It's no long-term commitment and relationship.
Right. So tell us about it. So tell me, how does the compound work? What is it? Why is it different? And why do we kind of want to see it, get out into the market?
So let's talk a minute about uveitis. 80% of the patients will have front of the eye diseases, anterior uveitis, while only 20% will have posterior uveitis. Regardless, the majority of drug development are for the posterior segments, if not all of them. But first-line treatment for all uveitis, the only treatment that can actually control inflammation, are steroids. And they are part of the problem for the chronic patients. And all the drugs, the immunosuppressants, the biologics, etc., are here only to get rid of the steroids and maintain quiet eye from inflammation, but they cannot really treat the active flare-up of the disease. So we needed to develop a drug which is overcoming all the pathways in which steroids are creating intraocular pressure elevation in order to bring an effective yet safe drug to the market. And dazutuftide was presented and demonstrated in the clinical trials is able to do that we are immunomodulating macrophages mainly from inflammatory stage into anti-inflammatory stage. And it's a great molecule. It's inspired by nature because part of it is phosphorylcholine, which is secreted by intestinal worms as part of the intestinal worm survival strategy to maintain our immune system, the host, a little bit less active so they can survive. So the molecule is comprised of this phosphorylcholine and tafzin together, which is secreted by our spleen. And now we have a synergistic effect between the two of them, and we are able to overcome the inflammation and control the inflammation without the IOP elevation. So it's a great molecule, inspired by nature, highly water soluble, which means that for eye drops, it's great. We don't need to add any solubility enhancers, and we are avoiding all those irritations associated with most of the topical drugs. And so this is the molecule. And it was developed at the Sheba Medical Center. And we took it and from the patent, this is what they have, and into ophthalmology.
So was it complicated? I mean, was it a complicated process to formulate this? It seems like you make it sound so easy, but you're taking two components, binding them together, having some synergistic effect to make something that's solubilized, able to be put into an eye drop that simulates gut anti-inflammatory activity. That doesn't sound super easy to me.
Piece of cake.
Okay. So, I mean, was it a challenge to actually develop it? I mean, how long has this process been going on?
So the company was established in 2016. We are celebrating 9 years next month. And it was a lot of brain work, a lot of challenges in every step of the development. And at the beginning, like any startup company in medical devices and pharma knows, it's a one mistake company. If you take the wrong decision, you are out of money, you didn't get your fundable milestone, and that's it. So a lot of very good people, lots of great chemists were involved in the process. And now we are able, it's a new chemical entity. It's a peptide conjugate. It's not an easy manufacturing, but now I think that a few months ago, we celebrated a great scale up of manufacturing from in 100,000 times bigger than our first very, very small batch. And now I think that we are already in the batch size for commercialization for the API. Formulation-wise, it's a very clever formulation. We leveraged the highly soluble compound and added some nice excipients that I think that they have a nice feeling in the eye. And we are manufacturing in Europe, both the API. We are collaborating with great companies and partners in Europe. And so this is one of the challenges. I think that the main challenge that we faced was the regulatory challenge and awareness challenge, because uveitis, steroids, 70 years, it's only topical steroids for the active disease. And investors and the relevant stakeholders are not very, excited about the indication. But once we increase the awareness about this uveitic glaucoma and uveitis with ocular hypertension and started to talk about that with the relevant stakeholders and then with the regulators, I think that we overcome the challenges nicely, and we reached the agreement with the agency, with the SPY agreement, that finally for the first time acknowledged the safety problems that we have with steroids with our SPY agreement that is toward assessing uveitis treatment from the safety and efficacy together. And I think that this is very important, specifically for patients that already progressed to uveitic glaucoma, that already lost some vision, that already are under many treatments for glaucoma. It can be brittle glaucoma and uveitis. So I think that we overcome the regulatory challenges. Actually, finally, we're able to find some path forward for the field.
Okay. Well, just so you know, about 1/3 of this gray hair is from my uveitic glaucoma patients, just so you know. About a third.
Okay.
A third is from my kids, and my third is from my golf games, just so you know. So that's pretty much how it goes. I want to ask Ashley a question. So, Ashley, you've got a long history in ophthalmic drug commercialization. Just tell us a little briefly about your background, and I want to know how you ended up getting here.
Yeah. First, thanks for having Daphne and I on the podcast today, Rob, and it's great to see you and to reconnect. I got to know Daphne about 6 months ago, and I was just initially kind of just doing a small project with her and getting to know her. And, that led down the path of wanting to be more involved with her and her leadership team and with Tarsier. But just in terms of my background prior to this, so I started my commercial biotech career at Genentech, which is an excellent training ground for people who are kind of trying to learn the industry. I worked on Lucentis and got to know the back of the eye space. I worked in ophthalmology gene therapy after that. So at the company now known as Adverum, I was an early hire there, and we were wrestling with all the questions about how you could price therapies that were one-time administered gene therapies, and that was really exciting. And really interestingly, I also spent time at Santen working on uveitis, on a drug that unfortunately didn't make it. And that was very pivotal in my decision to eventually join Tarsier. But most recently, I launched Oxervate for neurotrophic keratitis. So I was the general manager for the US for Dompé, and I built the commercial infrastructure here in the United States for that drug. And there are certainly some parallels between what we were encountering there on Oxervate and some of the things that we know about the market and that we think about commercialization here. So that's kind of been my journey. I've been in ophthalmology a long time, but Zoom is touching up my appearance, thankfully, so no one can tell how old I am.
Yeah, me too. I have a special filter which makes me look 30 pounds thinner and 10 years younger, so it's awesome.
It's the beauty of AI.
Yeah, it's great. And then, so then, I get it. You meet Daphne and then you're immediately sucked in. That's what she does. It's terrible. It's incredibly, she's super talented at sucking you into the story here. So, I understand the allure here, and I knowing what I know about the company, you can talk a little bit about that in a minute, how the Oxervate model would apply here. So can you explain to people why you think that's the case and why you think that the launch of Tarsier's lead compound will be similarly successful?
Yeah. So I guess first I want to touch on your comment about Daphne enticing people to join and selling people on the story, because that's just super relevant, Rob. As I've gotten to know myself better and my career has evolved, I've realized there are sort of three things that are important to me in my career. One is I want to work on awful diseases where patients really need a treatment, a step change for a treatment. The second is I want to work on awesome science. And Daphne is so modest when she talks about the molecule here, but the fact that we're taking an insight from roundworms that live in your gut and evade your immune system and turning that into an eye drop, it's exciting, and it's incredible. And then the third thing that's important to me is just working with really smart people and people who I can learn from. And as you said, Daphne is just a super inspiring leader and visionary, and that has been really exciting. But I guess your question about Oxervate is really prescient because there are certainly some parallels. One, of course, is the disease is terrible and doesn't have great treatments. So when I learned about neurotrophic keratitis before I joined Dompé, I was shocked by the lack of treatment options. And when I first started working on uveitis back in 2016, on a different molecule, I was so surprised that a post-steroidal era had not come to pass so far in this disease. So when you look at autoimmune diseases in dermatology, for example, so whether it's prurigo nodularis or palmoplantar pustulosis, or even if you think about lupus, those diseases used to be treated with steroids too. Topical steroids or systemic steroids, and they're not anymore because people have innovated and worked on new drugs, and that hasn't happened yet in uveitis. And so when we launched Oxervate, we were so excited, and clinicians were excited because we were bringing them something really new and exciting that they needed, that was a step change in efficacy. And when I think about bringing dazdutide to clinicians, I'm excited to have a very similar experience here. This molecule is really something that fills a gap, and that's exciting.
And do you think it has the same commercial pathway? I don't know if everybody listening knows how Oxervate is priced and how it works, but do you envision a similar commercial strategy for this based on the number of patients for whom this would be an applicable treatment, or do you think it will be a slightly different, more broad-based pricing for anybody who wants to use an anti-inflammatory that doesn't raise intraocular pressure?
Yeah. So on the commercial strategy, I mean, one of the reasons that I love Daphne is her unequivocal commitment to patients who need the drug being able to get the drug. And I think that's we have sort of shown that already once by enrolling pediatric patients in our early clinical studies. They were enrolled in our phase 3 that's completed, and they're going to be enrolled in our upcoming studies. And that's just Daphne's commitment to making sure that patients who could benefit from the drug are in the studies. We generate the data, and they'll be able to access the drug if the data bears out. So we'll have all the access programs in place, and we'll set a price, I think, that's reasonable based on the efficacy that we deliver and the number of patients there are. So I think I wouldn't want to speculate on what we'll do in terms of a price, but obviously, there's more patients with uveitis than there are with neurotrophic keratitis. That being said, the efficacy and the benefit in a disease that causes 30,000 cases of blindness a year is really incredible innovation.
Right.
So, but patient access will be there. And that's like number one part of the job.
Great. So that's great. So we'll see. I guess we'll have to wait and see how it pans out for you guys with regard to that. But I mean, at least as an investor, when we look at, kind of disruptive changes that have happened in ophthalmology, they're very few and far between, right? I mean, we're still using chemical antifibrosis from the 1980s for glaucoma surgery. Prostaglandin analogs were a disruptor, and anti-VEGF therapy. So in the last 50 years, we've had 3 basic, disruptive pharmacologic, mega changes that have, altered, and then they kind of just sit there and languish, right? It's time for this. So we kind of need this.
So in terms of innovation, right, I think Oxervate is, of course, a good example. I think Tepezza is another example. And then I think the other analogs, just in terms of like step changes and benefit, it's really instructive to look outside of ophthalmology, which sometimes maybe we're not great at because we're in ophthalmology and we're just looking at the eye drug marketplace. But
and nothing else matters anyway. Ophthalmology is the most
yeah, exactly. But I do think dermatology, rheumatology, there are lessons to be learned from those other therapeutic areas that are really relevant here.
Yeah, I would agree. So Daphne, where are we? Where are you guys at? What is the status of the company, clinical process? Where are you?
So we are currently in a fundraising effort, and the funding will be focused on supporting the final stages of the clinical development based on the SPA agreement that we have from the FDA. We need to repeat the same trial that we've conducted before, reach the same results, but the endpoints are different. And those new endpoints are endpoints that we already met statistical significance in the previous trial. So I consider this as a de-risked regulatory and clinical program. We need to prepare for commercialization with the relevant funding, and also, of course, get ready with manufacturing. We did a very nice scale up of the API manufacturing. We need to do the same for the drug product. And of course, beyond the immediate milestones, this funding will also enable us to expand our pipeline for back of the eye indications. And you mentioned anti-VEGFs. I believe that our dazotuftide with our slow release formulation, the TRSO2, is going to be very it's going to change much the area of back of the eye blinding diseases. Not only uveitis, but many other indications are based on inflammatory pathologies and macrophages involvement. So I think that we have a very long pathway. And if steroids were introduced to the eye 70 years ago, we are starting our journey with the dazotuftide now.
Yeah, if I take a step back and I think about how the future looks for you, I know this is a separate area, not quite as disruptive, but we got the first product to treat blepharitis. It's Demodex blepharitis, but it's blepharitis, right? Xdemvy, and the comment that we had, at least in the investment community, was, we'll probably identify more cases of Demodex and it'll get treatment. But the fact is, once you have the indication, it's going to open up other indications, right? Once you know you can use this or something, well, then you could start looking at meibomian gland dysfunction. You can start looking at all the other treatments of blepharitis and all that other stuff. You know what I mean? And the fact is that, this is the same for you. You just need the indication to get approved, because once everybody realizes that we have anti-inflammatory therapy without the risk of elevation of intraocular pressure, first of all, make me a lot happier as a glaucoma specialist, to make glaucoma specialists all over the world happier. But if you just think about how much safer it's going to be to treat all these front and back of the eye diseases with anti-inflammatory therapy. I mean, you still think about how much steroid is still being used to treat these diseases and how many complications arise as a result of that. The elimination is just such a disruptive change for the treatment of inflammatory disease in the eye. That's going to be what happens to you. I'm sure you know that. I think the messaging for the investment community is that that's the trajectory here. Get your approval, get your approval, and then move on to the solving every single problem that this drug can solve. And that's, I think you probably agree, Ashley. That's the answer, right, Ashley? I mean, it's like you see that.
It's real. The pipeline is really exciting, and the work that Daphne and the team have done on the intravitreal formulation, I think, is really compelling. And so one of the things that's exciting is working together to think about this strategic, how do we think about ordering those indications, and what direction does the company take after anterior non-infectious uveitis?
So is that the long-term vision, Daphne? In the last 2 minutes here, tell me what you think. Like, what's the future for you? I mean, what are you going to be doing?
My goal from 9 years ago that we met, I think, and we are bringing a breakthrough treatment for patients. We are going to hopefully to save vision for many patients with minimizing the risks associated with current standard of care. And specifically for the most vulnerable eyes of uveitic glaucoma and uveitis with ocular hypertension, but also expand to the other back of the eye of indications. And at the end of the day, we are here to build a global leading pharmaceutical company specializing in saving sight. And if we are concluding, probably a quote by Helen Keller will be appropriate. The vision for the future, the team, and is very inspired, and myself very inspired and motivated by a Helen Keller quote that the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And I think that everyone in our community can relate to this.
Well, I can tell you that the entire investment world of ophthalmology is rooting for you guys to succeed. All we all need is some money to help you get there. But, the one thing that I can tell you is that from the moment that I met you and everybody met you knows that this company will be successful, because there is no way you will not succeed. That is the reality of you. So, with that, Daphne Haim-Langford and Ashley Kline from Tarsier, thank you so much for your time today. We are all rooting for you to get yourselves your funding and get your endpoints done, because we need your product. And I truly believe that it will happen. And that the entire community is behind you. You're going to try and help make sure that happens. So on behalf of everybody, thank you for all the work you're doing. And we know that you will continue to be successful in the future. To the OIS audience, thank you for taking the time to listen today. You can reach out to Daphne and Ashley directly at Tarsier, and I look forward to speaking with you again at the next podcast. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Rob.